With all the demand for SBA skilled people, why in the world would any SBA professional who's worth their salt need a recruiter to help them land a job? Well, do Tom Brady and Michael Jordan have agents? Exactly. The truth is, the value of a vested partner in your success, someone who will work to learn your story, your priorities, and your values, is immeasurable. The team at Baker Lewis has over 30 years' experience helping SBA professionals think strategically about how to make the best move possible, and helping SBA lenders think strategically about how to build their teams. In the last quarter alone, Baker Lewis has helped a new SBA lender staff and launch its small loan program, helped the number one BDO at a top 10 shop find a new home and get a great deal, by the way, and placed a junior servicer and more. Look, we're in a bit of a wonky market. It's easy to make a mistake. You can't rush this stuff. This is your career. These are your people. Schedule a call with Baker Lewis today and begin the process of finding the best possible opportunity for you. We'll leave a link in the show notes.
Hello and welcome back to the Art of SBA Lending podcast. I'm your host, Ray Drew. I hear from people just about every week asking how they can become a BDO. I mean, it is the best job in the world. So you would think folks who are in the BDO role would be content doing that forever, and many are. But some have a sickness. It's called never being satisfied. We know we need to push ourselves outside of our comfort zones because that's how we grow. It's part of the reason BDOs are successful in the first place. BDOs need to be driven, motivated, and strategic to make it out here. And I would say most of us are driven not by money, but by intrinsic motivation to win. So if you find yourself lucky enough to be a BDO, the first step is producing, getting to 15 million. Once you get there, you push yourself to 25 million. The $25 million producer, by the way, is one of the hardest jobs. You're not big enough to have a team of assistants around you. You're basically given the same resources as a $15 million producer. You're just doing more. A lot of folks get off that merry-go-round at this point and go into sales management because they're just tired of the grind. Others will decide, hey, I want to get to that next level. I want to hit 35, 40 million, but I'm going to need some support. And that's a whole new challenge, and it keeps you uncomfortable because now you have to learn delegation. Now, once you get to 50 million and beyond, you're stuck. You're making ungodly amounts of money. You have all of this infrastructure around you. And even if you wanted to stop, you couldn't because folks are just going to continue sending you deals. But what happens when several years go by of cranking out 50 to 60 million? Those are numbers you wouldn't have been able to dream of in the beginning. You're a top 1% producer. Most BDOs would kill to be in that position. But to that BDO, they're stagnant. It's not fun anymore. The growth has stopped, and they're ready for their next challenge. Do they A, go for 100 million, B, become a sales manager, C, go run a shop, or D, other? Today, we're going to break down the different career paths for top producing BDOs. Let's start with scaling to 100 million. What kind of sick person tries to do $100 million worth of 7A loans? I only know about 5 people who've ever done it. 100 million is more than what 95% of entire banks do. A bank that does 100 million a year in 7A would be ranked like number 55 in the country. You would need 2 to 3 assistants, 2 to 3 closers, 2 to 3 underwriters. At this point, you're essentially building a shop within a shop. This is probably not realistic for 99% of the people listening, but maybe it is. Maybe it just takes more people doing it to make others realize it's possible, because quite honestly, this is probably the path that would generate the most income for that person. But it takes a bank that's willing to allocate significant resources around you and be okay with potential concentration risk. And the BDO has to create and maintain a lot of referral sources that are sending you deal flow that can be converted at a pretty high rate. But is it worth it? What does $100 million a year look like? Every minute of your day is scheduled. You have no time to waste. You will never be caught up. As much as we talk about delegating, your referral partners and customers want access. The only solution is to work more. It's very likely that you'll find yourself working late every night and on weekends. Every time you clear out your inbox, poof, 100 more emails appear. When you're on a 30-minute Zoom call, 4 more texts, 3 more calls come in. This will send you on a path of extreme burnout. If that's not for you, let's look behind door number 2, full-time sales manager. Now, this is the life. You're basically half retired at this point. I'm just kidding. A national sales manager kind of falls into one of 3 buckets. The one that's in the trenches, fighting with credit on behalf of the BDO, getting in the weeds on the deal, pre-screening deals, very deal-centric, okay? Then there's the one that's more like a high-level manager, working with the leaders within the organization to create an environment that makes BDOs want to come and work, have good processes, good support, technology that works, etc. Finally, you have a more of a marketing-forward sales manager. They're in the market, promoting the brand, and creating relationships. And in some cases, the sales manager embodies all 3. Now, that doesn't sound too bad, right? Well, here's the problem. The pay is trash. Full-time sales managers are getting an override of the BDO's production. I've seen anywhere from 10 to 25 bips. So if you're a $50 million producer moving into that role, well, you're probably not, because that's a 50% pay cut. For that reason, most of today's full-time managers were not mega producers when they made the switch, which is a whole nother discussion for a different episode. So what if you want to scratch that management itch without taking a big pay cut? Well, bring in the player coach BDO role, a controversial role. Some would argue, how can someone do both jobs well at the same time? I think it is possible, but it's hard. A player coach BDO should be managing 3, maybe 4 BDOs, whereas a full-time sales manager typically can manage around 8 to 10 BDOs. Here, you'd get a small override on top of the commission that you're receiving on your own production. The big issue here is that you have to really want to manage BDOs because you're probably spending about 25% of your time generating 10% of your income. It doesn't make much financial sense. So you guys see where I'm going? If you're a top producing BDO that wants to find their next challenge, so far, your options are work 80 hours a week, grind your face off and burn out, take a 50% pay cut, or just managing BDOs to your responsibilities for an amount of additional income that you barely notice. And that leads us to our final option, go run a shop. The biggest challenge of all. If you're a top 50 shop, you've probably got 20 plus people in your department, and you'd be the leader of all that. Sales, operation, closing, servicing, sometimes even credit, all rolling up to you. Compliance, profitability, driving volume, dealing with audits, managing personnel. You would now be an executive overseeing an organization. And this role could be lucrative. Your position could be tied to volume, profitability, the performance of the bank, or a combination of all of those things. This path checks a lot of boxes for a BDO. You wanted a challenge? Well, here's your challenge. And if you perform, you actually have a shot at making BDO level compensation. Sometimes less, sometimes more, just depends on the situation. But BDOs like this model because they're used to their actions directly impacting their compensation. And outside of the BDO role, this is the role where that can happen, but in a slightly different way. No longer is it close a deal, get paid. Now it's make the right hire, build the right process, foster a good culture. And 3 years from now, you might have a shop generating $6 million in net income, and maybe you get a cut of that. But here's the problem with this one. BDOs go their entire lives receiving praise, getting the spotlight, and getting shielded from work that isn't revenue generating. The entire system is set up to allow the BDO to go out and sell as much as possible, and that's the stuff BDOs enjoy the most. When you go into a director role, now the employees get the praise. You need to shine a spotlight on your team. You need to somehow pull off going from the star of the team to an egoless leader that gains the respect of not just the sales team, but the credit and operations teams as well. Finally, you have to deal with the federal government. And written policies and procedures are part of it. Budgets and payrolls, things you might consider, well, boring. But what if there was a way to pursue this leadership challenge, have a chance of building something, and earning unlimited commission based on the performance of what you build without having to apply for PLP? Introducing the mini director role. We're going to need a better name for that. Well, if I was a $50 million producer that wanted to go start a shop because I was looking for that next challenge. I can now start a shop within my shop. Could that work? Let's play this out. What would that look like? Well, look at the pod model, for example. The pod model is a step in the right direction. When I had a pod at Fundex, we had an underwriter, 2 closers, an analyst, and a loan coordinator, and I was the BDO. What if I had transitioned into a mini director and hired an associate lender to take over the remainder of the work I was doing on individual deals? I could then focus on high-level sales and marketing and grow our production. And then I would hire another associate lender to handle that additional volume along with another underwriter and closer. If you were given a similar level of autonomy, like compared to the actual director, and you ran a P&L, and let's say you got 50% of the net income instead of your typical BDO commission, that would be a perfect combination of all these different career paths. And maybe the BDO would take a pay cut for the first, year or two while they're building it. We're talking about a 50-50 joint venture here where they can actually build something and live or die by the profits they create without having to manage an Okram audit. I think they would be receptive to that. I think I just cracked the code. New BDO career path unlocked. Let's welcome our panel for today's show. Dustin Baker, co-founder and CEO of Shatterbox, Jeannie Yoder, SBA Regional Executive at United Community Bank, and Jared Johnson, Senior Business Development Officer at First Internet Bank. Guys, I'm guessing you weren't prepared to hear what I just said. That was a lot. Jared, I'm going to go to you first, since you are one of the 5 people I know who has hit the $100 million mark. Speak to that $40, $50 million producer that may be deciding, what they want to do next in their career and maybe trying to scale to 100 is one of those things. Like, what does doing $100 million a year look like?
Yeah, I feel like I should say my name's Jared Johnson and I have a sickness or something. I don't know.
The first step is admitting it.
Yeah, right.
Hi, Jared.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, right? I mean, having kind of done multiple parts of what you just discussed and went over, each one definitely has its challenges. And I think ultimately what it comes down to is what somebody is focused on, right? If it's the money, if it's the seniority, if it's you enjoy doing deals, there's so many different things that you can kind of focus on, and that really is what drives you. But going from 50 to 100 million is definitely a big challenge. As you mentioned, between 25 and 50, you definitely need help to get from 25 to 50, but from 50 to 100, I feel like you need even more help than you do from 25 to 50. And if you don't have that help and you don't have the proper people in place, you absolutely will burn out. Working 70, 80 hours a week is normal at 100 plus million. And it is definitely not something that's sustainable. I struggle with that all the time. There's not a way to kind of sugarcoat it. There's some great positives, and you're doing some amazing things for borrowers, buyers, sellers of businesses, all, banks, employees that rely on you within the bank, and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, you kind of throw out your personal health and wellness half the time to achieve those types of things. So it's not something that is really for many people, which is probably why you only know of 5 people that have ever done it. And so I'm constantly asking myself why I do it to myself. But as you mentioned as well, once you get to that level, you really can't turn it off. There's not much I can do. I mean, while you said that, I probably got 30 emails. And so it's just how it is. And it's tough to explain to somebody that you want to be busy and you want to continue to find new ways to get deals, but then you also don't at the same time because you're tired and you have so much going on. It's impossible to keep up with. So
I appreciate that insight into a little bit, behind the scenes there.
If you've been a fan of the show for a while, then you know one of my favorite companies to work with is Rapid Business Plans. More and more small business lenders and their borrowers are relying on Rapid to help with the business plan, projections, and assumptions because their team goes the extra mile to ensure everything is done fast and done right. So it's no surprise that they just created their, wait for it, 1800th custom business plan. And they wanted me to thank all of you for helping make that possible. In fact, Rapid Business Plans hosts an annual lender appreciation event to show how much they appreciate your support. Tyler Palooza, which is of course named after their number one referral partner this year, will be hosted at Bethany and Ross's home in Neptune Beach, Florida on Saturday, October 12th. For more information about the event or to find out why so many top producing BDOs recommend Rapid Business Plans to their small business borrowers for their business plans and feasibility studies, click the link in the description below. Now back to the show.
Dustin, what's a typical progression of a BDO?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I don't know that I think there's a typical progression of a BDO, right? There's different kinds of BDOs. Like there's folks that are never going to light the world on fire. They're also never going to cause the shop trouble. They want to work with fewer deals at a time. They want to really know those deals. They can be trusted to kind of find all the boogeymen in the closet and communicate those effectively. Sales managers and credit managers love these folks. They're going to do 10, 12, $15 million. They're going to make you money. And probably their best year is going to be 18 or 20, and things just fluctuate, but the way they work is not going to fluctuate. And then you've got people that are just going to challenge themselves until they figure out what their limits are. Jared's one of those folks, and the challenge there is you've got to find out what your limit is at some point, and that's going to be a challenging thing to discover. I sat with a guy that you guys probably know a few weeks ago. And, he kind of broke down in the conversation and talked about some of the things that he left on the table with his family. He wasn't talking about money, right? Other sacrifices that he'd made. And he kind of pulled back to a place that is sustainable for him in a normal work week, make some money he needs to make, and has chosen kind of his family first in different places where he didn't in the past. So I think it depends on the kind of BDO, what the progression is. There's steady people that are just going to be steady until they decide to stop doing it and do something else. There's people who are going to blow hot and cold. They're going to figure out how white hot they can get, and then they're going to step away and kind of evaluate if that's a sacrifice they want to keep making. And then there's people who have had other things in mind from the beginning. They want to be a successful BDO because it opens a door to do something else, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that could be something else inside the industry. It could be something else outside the industry. There's no center of the bullseye for what a good BDO is. There's as many people that you think are kind of that charismatic salesperson that's kind of your textbook BDO. There's 10 outliers that are also very successful for different reasons. And so I think you can identify kind of in a given shop, this is what makes somebody most successful most often in this shop. It's a pretty diverse group of folks that do this job. And there's a pretty diverse group of folks that do this job really well in this industry.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think it can look a lot of different ways.
Yeah. And Jeannie, you've been for many years one of those people that were doing it well. And you recently transitioned into an executive role at your bank after many years of being a BDO. And I was wondering if you can sort of let us into your brain and share kind of why you felt it was time to make that shift.
I'd love to. I consider a very successful BDO. Jared didn't do the 100 million, but I had several years where I did 60 million. One of the years I had 60 million, I had 85 million approved, lost 15 million to other institutions. So I wasn't too far behind you and had several years of my career, 30 to 40 million. So I understand what goes into it. But I'm at a different stage in my life where I feel like, I've had each decade learning, progressing, pushing myself. And I'm thinking, at this point in my career, where do I want to end the last 10 years, if you will? And Ray, not to go out and, put yourself out to pasture. I think as you mentioned earlier, but if you think yourself and you think about the national relationships, you think about the local relationships, you think about the young people that are up and coming, and you look at these people and you put yourself, I was once one of those people, right? How can I foster and develop and mentor someone? And the best way I can do that is within a team. And for myself personally, it's in a well-established team. And to your point, Dustin, it's great to have those 10, 12, $15 million producers who do it every year. But it's also good to be able to help them continue to grow and become the $20, $25 million a year producer. And Jared, to your point, I understand that it can be addictive, but at a point, personally for me, you're asking yourself, when does my addiction or when does my, competitive nature, because I'm extremely competitive, go to the point where I just want to help others? It's a different mindset, if you will. And I think that's where I was, Ray. I'd been in SBA lending for 15 years, banking for 35 years. I know it extremely well. I've done it extremely well. Some of the best organizations I've worked for. And I just feel like, when the right opportunity comes, you really assess where are you personally in your career, and do you make that decision, what's right for you at the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's go through some of these options, and thank you, Jeannie, for sharing that. And I'm going to go back to Jared now. So, was doing 100 million a conscious decision that you made? Like, how does one do $100 million? Where do you start?
Yeah, and I think kind of to Jeannie's point, with the addiction thing, I guess for me it's always kind of been, I've wondered how much I could do in kind of the right situation or in the right circumstances. I've kind of always felt like I could do really high volume or try to do more than anybody in the industry or something like that. And so I guess I just kind of continued to push myself and see what I could do. And going from 50 to 75 to 100, I guess halfway through the year last year, I kind of looked at my production and what I had approved and what was in closing and everything, and kind of said, I think I could do 100. Like, let's see if I can do it. And so it was kind of more or less just continuing on a normal daily basis of cranking out deals, and ended up doing enough to get to that point. And this year I think I'm at like 78 or something right now. So I should go well over 100. And I think more this year it becomes more of a conscious goal where I look at it and forecast and say, can I get there? Looking and saying, okay, I've gotten 120 million approved, so I should be able to get there, no problem, right? So when you kind of hit those numbers and then forecast it out, you can see where it's going to be. And so from there, I wouldn't say that I directly want to sit there and say, okay, can I do 150? Can I do 200? I don't know if that's possible by myself. I would need 5, 6 assistants, like a dedicated team, almost kind of being my own shop, like you were talking about. I feel like even sometimes taking out, saying, okay, well, I'm only going to do this size and up, or I'm only going to work on this industry, or if this deal is too challenging, I'm going to punt where I normally would work harder to try to swim against the current and get it approved. Even as I've done things like that this year, it still has continued to do more than last year. So I don't really know, short of just saying I'm done and I'm only going to work on really large transactions or something. I don't really know how to get myself out of that at this point now.
There was probably some things you did over the last 20 years that set you up for doing 100 million, right? You've been doing this a while, right?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing is I was one of the first people working on business acquisitions. I found, years ago that I really enjoyed it, and it was challenging and it was difficult. And I don't think that I looked at it and said, okay, this is a full niche that I can exploit, and not very many people are doing it. And one day it'll lead to me doing $100 million. I think I just really enjoyed doing that. And I liked the process of somebody selling a business they worked really hard on to somebody that's going to take it and most likely breathe new life into it and grow it. And I liked that part of it, and I felt like it was fun. It was also a huge challenge to learn so much about each industry and become kind of an expert in not only business acquisitions, but also there's so much more you have to learn outside of just doing rent replacement or equipment or something like that, which all have their own challenges. But I do feel like it's the hardest part of SBA lending. And so I kind of wanted to get into that. And then fortunately, that industry and business acquisition as a whole kind of exploded and grew. And me being sort of at the front of that, or kind of already ahead of some other folks in that world, it positioned me in a really good spot.
Jared, I have a solution for you. My solution is that you change your goal to see which day of the year you stop working each year. So like, how fast can you get to 100 million? You're like, it's August 1st, guys. Here's my vacation responder for the next 5 months. I'm out. So
that doesn't work. And I know you're joking, but like, that's the thing. Like, but I understand what you're saying, because halfway through that first $100 million year, which was last year, right? That's when you thought to yourself, well, this is actually possible. But going into that year, you weren't trying to do 100. So I kind of understand what you're saying. It's more like the stars have aligned, like you said, to this point where I can do this. So then if you're going to do it, I mean, why not? And then once you've done it, now the goal becomes, well, I have to do at least what I did last year.
Yeah, I've told myself that, you do it once, people could say it's a fluke. You do it twice and they're like, okay, you might be good at this. You do it 3 times and people just say you're nuts. And so,
that's right.
You kind of like, does it make sense to continue to do it? But to your point, I mean, do I sit there and say, hey, I would probably be really good running a shop, or would I be good being a sales manager? I mean, I've done the player coach role before. So, at what point do I say, is that what I want to do? Do I want to take all the money that I've made and go buy a business and grow that so that I actually have equity in something and there's actually some kind of light at the end of the tunnel? I mean, I can't sell my production like I could sell my business, right? I mean, I wish that would be great. But, you kind of do start to run into these thoughts in your head of, what do I do next? Do I just keep trying to do this until,
right,
as my wife says, she finds me keeled over one day on my desk, like, and we don't want that to happen either. And so, as Dustin said, I mean, it's very real thoughts that you have of sitting there going, what am I missing out on today? And who cares if you make good money and you're helping all these people achieve their dreams, and you're helping to employ people at your bank and all these things. Like, at the end of the day, if you look back and feel like a jerk because you didn't spend enough time with your family, like, who cares?
Right.
So where do you find that balance, right?
Jared, I think you nailed it. I was going to say, I think you nailed it, Jill. Work-life balance is extremely important. And I think as you do this for decades and decades, and earn in banking in general, especially in SBA and our volume and our pace, I've seen so many people, and I'm older than you guys, who at the very end find out they may have stage 4 cancer, and you don't have more years ahead of you, and you have that, financial wherewithal, but you don't have the time to do anything with it.
That's a really good point. And that's kind of what I wanted to ask you. Like, if you had someone on your team come to you and say, hey, I want to do 100 million next year, like, what would you tell them? Would you give them advice and help them get there? Or like, what would you say?
By first, you always have to be realistic with people. You have to see, what did you do last year? What did you do the year before? You never want to put your goals to the point where people can't reach them. Otherwise, you're just aiming for the stars, and it's like having projections. Sometimes you wonder where the assumptions coming from with the projections. So I have a lot of national relationships. I have a lot of broker referrals. I can help them with their volume, but we have to be realistic with our game plan and our business plan and our personal development. So I'd have to, number one, is see where they were the year, this most recent year, see what's, attainable in terms of how much of an increase can you actually get. Jared, to your point with Jared, I don't really know, but a handful of people that's gotten over 75 million. So
well, let's say they were your top producer. Just think then they're doing like 40, 50 million, and they're trying to get, let's just say they're trying to get to 75 million. So something reasonable. Like, what are the things they've got to do to get to that next level? Typically, when you're already a top, 1 or 2 or 3% type of producer trying to get to that even higher level.
Well, number one, you've got to swim upstream. If your average deal size is $1 million, it then goes to $5 million. My average deal size was $5 million. That's one of the reasons I was able to, get my $60, $70 million in approvals.
Wow.
You've got to swim upstream. Yeah, you've got to swim
Doesn't
upstream.
get much higher than that on an average loan.
Oh, well, you've got to swim upstream. You've got to recognize the 504 product. You've got to be able to know the Go Green product. You've got to, your
504
tool,
doesn't count.
well, still yet, your toolbox has to become larger. I tell people all the time, you don't have to be the sharpest tool in your toolbox, but you need to be the most resourceful.
Okay. So Dustin,
Does that make sense, Ray?
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100%. Your average loan is probably the biggest thing to get you there.
Imagine if Jarrett was doing $200,000, $300,000 loans to get $100 million. Jarrett, it's not possible, right?
No, I think last year I did 70 loans total, and I'll probably do the same or not more this year. But
a lot.
I've been trying really hard to say I don't do that size of deal. Like, I want a bigger deal. Like, here's somebody that can handle it. I mean, I'm probably the biggest referral source for the Community Advantage program in the country. Like, and I think it's a great program. Stacy Sanchez does an amazing job. Like, here you go. Here's deals that, that aren't really the best fit for me. Take it on. And I still, like, it's almost like I turn away a lot and it still keeps coming, so.
Yeah, and I'm not seeing any of those deals, but that's okay. Dustin, I'm going to go to you. 100 million at most shops seems impossible. What are the barriers that prevent most shops from having a BDO that can get anywhere close to 100 million?
Well, I think there's a few things. One is I'm not sure most shops want a $100 million producer.
Correct.
Because most shops don't want somebody making $2 million doing SBA loans, right? That's making 4 or 5 times the bank CEO in that shop. There are special institutions that understand, like, we're making the yeoman's share of this revenue that you're generating. And the more you make, the more that is returned to the shareholders, the more people we help. But that's few and far between in terms of bankers that really even want somebody like that. And so then, there's resourcing. Either you're going to resource something. If that person doesn't have support, it may be possible once if they want to kill themselves. It's not possible on a regular kind of consistent basis. And there's a lot of shops that just refuse to provide support staff for their BDOs. And so that's just going to create a naturally lower ceiling for what their BDOs can accomplish, right? They're not willing to go into a pod setting where I've got familiarity with the closers and underwriters that are going to handle all of my deals. I think that if Jared moved into 99% of the SBA shops in the country, he'd break that shop. Like, by day 30, they'd just be saying, "Uncle, please don't send us any more deals. This was a mistake," right? And so generally, it's a shop that's done this long enough. They've built enough resources. They're able to resource that person. And if you're doing 50 plus and you're looking for a job move, you've got to be really, really cautious because it's easy to make a mistake if you're at that level. And comp plans look great on paper, but if they can't execute and support you, then you're done. And then you suffer referral source loss and all these kind of things. So I think those are the primary things that would keep a shop from being able to have someone get there.
So I'm going to move on into door number 2 here, which is sales management. Dustin, what's your take on the national sales manager position? Who's typically filling that role?
It's interesting. That role's changed a lot since I started recruiting in 2004. Typically, shops had one big person, regional sales managers reported up to them. It's a lot less common role. And we do the compensation studies. We had 25 of the top 100 lenders in the country respond to the last one we did. The compensation for national sales managers was actually a little lower than compensation for regional sales managers. And I see more of kind of a bifurcation to people that you've got a team of 10 to 12, you've got a team of 10 to 12, and I don't see it. It's a flatter organization typically now. And so there just aren't as many of those roles that I see being filled that way. If there's,
you think it's moving more towards like the player coach role?
I think there's a lot of player coach roles in place of what used to be kind of a regional sales manager, which would be management only, 10 to 12, 15 BDOs, and then there's a figurehead at the top of the organization. Now I see kind of regional sales managers, and then I see, unless it's a really big shop, like Live Oak is going to have a national sales manager, Huntington's going to have a head of sales, et cetera. But outside of that top 10, I don't see it much. And then, yes, the smaller shops are going to have 2 or 3 kind of high producing BDOs that they're going to allow to build a team of 3, 4, 5 people. I see that as a lot more common than a way that sales management.
And the regional is that a producing role?
Typically, it hasn't been historically, but that's kind of converted more into either I've got a dozen or more BDOs and I'm management only, and I've got a little override on that, or I'm producing and I've got a handful of BDOs under me. And that in my just empirical survey of the market, I see that a lot more right now than just purely managerial folks in that role.
Why do you think that shift is occurring?
Well, I mean, I think organizations get flat because people are looking for an opportunity to save, a layer of compensation they'd be paying.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting. This is a guess, but it could be too that a lot of people that landed in those roles, to your point earlier, they had been a BDO, but not a real good one. And so if that's somebody that I'm having train people how to be successful sales folks, it just didn't work that well, right? That I think has largely become an unnecessary role in most organizations.
That's very interesting.
It's a Peter Principle thing.
So, Jeannie, what do you think about the player coach BDO role? Like, if you think that's a doable position, and if so, like, how do they balance managing BDOs with doing their own production?
Ray, I think this is a great topic because I could have, easily have been a player coach. But there, as I mentioned, as you know, I made a personal decision. There comes a point in your career. Personally, I didn't think it was fair for me, and I can't speak to everybody because there are people who do this. Personally, I didn't think it was fair for me to come over and compete with anybody that was a direct report with me, because I didn't think it would be. It just, when you look at the reports, you look at the production, you look at the loans, it deflates people. They're like, oh yeah, she's coaching me, but look at her volume. I would rather have my referral sources have opportunities and then give them back to my, direct reports. It just doesn't sit well with me.
No, I totally get it. And I totally understand what you're saying, especially if you're trying to focus on
motivate,
exactly.
Encourage, develop people. How do you motivate, encourage, and develop someone when you're sitting there and your production's $40-50 million a year? You've got a referral source in my backyard, and yet I'm struggling. I may be doing 10-15 million. You want to help me elevate to the next level, and you're taking a potential deal out of my backyard. Ray, we were back on the topic of a player coach. I've seen that many times. When I was a commercial banker, I was a player. I had a player coach, and it just in the team environment, I didn't have any good feedback from any of the players about the coach. And I just didn't want to be a part of that. And it can work, but me personally, I decided it wasn't the route for me.
I hear as many complaints about that issue from BDO candidates that I work with as anything else. As much as, credit policy is changing, or closers are slow, or it's 6 weeks to get, assigned to an underwriter. They say, and it's the optics. Even if it's not true, the optics are, if you've got to fight for somebody's deal, if things are slow in the queue, who's going to get more attention? Are you going to give more attention to your deal, or are you going to focus on me helping get my deal through? And those optics are just almost impossible to overcome. And it pisses BDOs off when they sense that's the case. And so as much as that has commonly become the model, there's a real challenge with that model in terms of just how BDOs feel about it.
So since we're talking about it, I'll jump in just because I've done it for the last 3 years. To make it successful, first of all, I only have had 2 to 3 BDOs at a time for the most part. I think I might have had 4 for a short period. Anytime you step on each other's toes in the market, like, hey, you're on the listing broker, I'm on the loan broker, something like that, 100% of the time you got to back away from that deal and give it to your BDO. And then if someone needs you, the BDO is prioritized above borrowers and above referral sources. So you have to be extremely selfless. You have to be a manager first, deal with your stuff at night or whatever. But, my referral sources and borrowers do, because you have to choose, you can't be in two places at once, then your production could potentially take a hit. Now, mine didn't really, but, I didn't keep growing. I started getting flat. And then you do it all. And why do you do it all? I mean, my income from the BDO management side of things was literally, I think, 3% of my total income or something. It was far below 10% of my income. So, that role is weird. You have, like I said, you have to really want to manage, which I did. And that's why I did it and I'm doing it. But otherwise, I agree. It's kind of a role that seems to just have fallen into place because we said, how can we beef up the P&L? Oh, well, this national sales manager is non-producing, getting paid a large amount of money. Let's cut them and let's elevate some BDOs, give them all teams, and move on.
I feel like I should say that what I said earlier, it doesn't reflect the opinions of Baker Lewis or Shatterbox, because we work with a lot of sales managers and player coaches, and it's not like that's the rule, but I think there are things that are problematic on both sides that you've got to wrestle with when you're building your model. And I think, too, if you're a BDO picking a career path, you've got to wrestle with it, too. Like, which set of challenges do I want to deal with, right? And it's
Wait,
not
hold
really
on.
an easy decision to make.
How can the thoughts of Baker not be part of the thoughts of Baker Lewis?
It was a joke, Ray. It's actually, we love all of our clients very much. I don't know what to tell you. Quit asking these hard-hitting questions.
Jared, I have a question. At your shop, do you have player coaches?
No, we just have a national sales manager.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say I did the player coach role. It was probably over 10 years ago, but I developed 4 BDOs. I think I inherited one. And you're right, the biggest challenge, I had kind of 2 major challenges. The first one was that the national sales manager or the director of the shop didn't really give me much authority. And so it was very challenging because I had BDOs that needed some extra help, and then I had some that probably weren't in the right position and should have been moved into something else, or maybe they just shouldn't have been a BDO. And I didn't have the ability to make those changes. So it became very frustrating. The other side to it was, like you mentioned, it was very difficult to say, okay, I can do, at that time I was probably doing 30, 40 million. And I'm sitting there going, okay, so I can do this and just be a BDO, which just being a BDO is still really challenging. But then add these other, things on top of it with HR and everything else you have to deal with. And right. I don't feel like you can be excellent at both. You could maybe be good at both. And right. Looking back, I think it was a great learning experience. And some of the BDOs that I brought in are still doing great. That was awesome. And it's fun to coach people and teach people how to do things. But if I was to do it again, it really the only way to do it would be I'd have to scale back my production, obviously. And then from there, I'd want to make sure that the people that I quote unquote managed were big producers that didn't really need me unless it was something major that I could come in and help with because of my experience and because of my expertise. Outside of that, it's really difficult to say, I'm going to go ahead and do that and kind of take a pay cut. It just seems kind of silly at that point.
Well, but then the flip side is, so if we're saying like the best way to do it, let's say, is to have a pure sales manager. Well, again, the way they're compensated, many of them have never put up big numbers because it's hard to do it, get big, make, the BDO compensation that would go along with that. And then right as you're doing that, transition into a sales manager as like your next level, it's like that's going to come with a pay cut. So a lot of the sales managers that are out there never really got to those 40, 50, $60 million levels. Do you think that matters? And if it's not like having been there, done that, then what is it that does make a good sales manager, in your opinion, Jared?
Yeah, I think it absolutely does matter. And it's apparent. Places I've worked, you can tell that the sales manager has never been at that level. And so it kind of begs the question of like, what do you need that individual for? Obviously, somebody's got to manage the sales team, and there are BDOs that do need the help and the nurturing from a sales manager. But then there's BDOs that are very high producing, and we've got, you know, 2, 3, 4 of them that are very good at our shop that are high producing. And really what we need from a manager is somebody who can jump in and help with, you know, maybe a disagreement in credit, or something that we're trying to push, or if we need more assistance, we need more help, we need to, you know, hire for a role or something. That's what that manager should be doing at that level. And so I think it changes the needs of a BDO from a sales manager change based on their tenure, their experience, their production, and then I guess also just kind of their personal drive and how they're looking at it. So there may be a BDO that's a lower producer, but they have the ability to do more and they want to do more. So a good sales manager at that point should be able to kind of look and see what their good skills are and kind of foster that. Whereas some of the higher producers, they almost need to, you know, leave them alone and get out of the way. But if they call, they should be, you know, one of their most important things is to answer that call and take care of what they need.
Yeah. And I feel like not many people in the industry are like thinking all of this through. And that's why I love that we're having these conversations. Cause I feel like a shop says, hey, maybe I want to hire a sales manager to go out and hire BDOs. And it's like, that's the end of the strategy call. Like, just go find BDOs. And there's so much value a good sales manager can make to a team. But I want to move on to door number 3 door number 3, I believe, which is start a shop, because we're running way over on time. Dustin, you've helped start some shops, right? What kind of background are institutions looking for to fill the role of the head honcho?
Most of those that we've worked on have been shops that want to move into the top 25. And so they want someone with management skins on the wall, not necessarily somebody who's coming out of a production role. If that makes sense, there's kind of an intermediary step for most people there. But we've worked with a lot of BDOs as clients who've made that transition. You know, maybe they've gone to work for a smaller bank. They're a $20 or $30 million producer. They're going to leverage that plus a few relationships, build a team of 4, 5, 6 people and start from there and grow. And I think you're looking for somebody who kind of leads on their own deals, kind of from a credit first standpoint, right? Like there's certain kinds of BDOs who would just drive themselves crazy in a department manager role. And I've seen some people make that mistake because it feels like their next step is, well, I'm going to go run a shop now. It's like, well, what are your goals? You know, what do you enjoy doing? What are the things that suck the life out of you? What are the things that give you life? And then when I answer all those questions, I'm like, well, then why the hell do you want to run a division? You're going to be a miserable person, and the people around you are going to be miserable people, right?
Are you recapping our call last year?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was going to keep that confidential, but you didn't listen to me. Nobody ever listens. You know, they have to have that voice in their ear 3 years later. They're like, I should have listened to that guy.
No, I have seen that trend though. A lot of BDOs are going and starting shops at like small banks and building small top 150 type of shops.
Well, and you know, Darren, who we were on with last time, has made a really successful transition there, but he was never, I mean, he's a productive BDO, but he wasn't Jared, you know, there's not many people that are Jared. He wasn't Jeannie either, but he was productive, but also just really had a good credit mind on him. Chris Hackney's another example, really good producer, came up through credit, understands kind of soup to nuts how a shop works and functions, has observed those things. And that was his path. And that's why, right? So, if you're BDO making that transition and you're, you know, kind of not a good balance between right brain, left brain, I'd think a little harder about it and think if there's maybe a different door to all your door analogies that you might want to go through.
Yeah. Well, but Jared, why would somebody who is a successful BDO, let's say doing 30 million, don't roll your eyes at that number, That's very good. Why would someone like that want to go become a director? I mean, is it purely just like, I think it's the next step, or is it a control thing? I want more control, or what do you think?
Yeah, I don't know that I could completely answer that. I do think 30 million is kind of right on that border where you're not going to see a enormous drop in compensation. So it may be that they're looking for something long term. Like maybe they feel like they've done a good job, at 30 million. Maybe they've been consistently doing 30, which is, a good number. And so they may feel like, okay, well, I've climbed that mountain for themselves, and now I want to go do something else.
Right.
And maybe 30 million is their top because they're not truly the BDO type. Like 30 was tough for them to do, but they could actually be even better at managing or delegating and understanding resources and everything else that goes into actually running a shop.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And the BDO role was just the pathway to get there.
Correct. Yeah, that's what I would think. And doing 30 million consistently and then going into that role, they likely could be a decent, manager or director because they understand the frustrations and they understand what goes into doing that kind of production. Whereas compared to somebody that does, maybe a smaller amount, or maybe they did 30 million once because they, had a really good year, and then they want to go in and run a shop because they think it's easier, it's less work. That's a completely different type of mentality or person, so.
Yeah. Well, going from BDO to director is a big jump, Jeannie, and there's a lot of pros and cons to it. Help me flush out some of those pros and cons when you're a BDO thinking about going into that type of role.
At the end of the day, you have to determine, to Darren's point, do you want to wake up every day and be a deal maker? Or do you want to wake up every day and say, how can I be a contributor and on a different level? And at that point, I think you have to look at the size of the organization. Are they, for example, United Community Bank was in the top 25. Where does the organization want to be? Do they want to try to compete with a Live Oak Bank or a Celtic Bank? What are the goals? And I'm a very pragmatic person. What's realistic? How can you help grow the bottom line? So when you asked Jared earlier, what is, there, I don't know if there's a rhyme or reason why people do what they do, but it's really a self-assessment. I think at the end of the day, you really have to know where your values are, how it is you can contribute the most, and what is your vision for your legacy or to help other people develop their full potential, and the organizations. What is the mission of the organization? Do you feel like you can add value to their mission? Is it feasible?
Yeah, and I really think the majority of BDO's career paths are just leveling up and down on production. Like you want to get to 15, you want to get to 25, you then maybe want to push yourself to 40, and then maybe you want to solve for work-life balance and go back down to 25. But it is the best job in the world, so most people stay in it. All right, so let's end this by letting Dustin crush my dreams. I laid out my mini director idea. Do you think realistically that idea has legs at most institutions?
I don't think many banking institutions are going to give you that much control. And if they are, they would probably just make you the director. And I've seen more banks that are willing to do, legitimate joint ventures, subsidiaries, majority ownership, profit share, and kind of give a lot of ability for somebody to build enterprise value inside of that institution that will live beyond just kind of the grind of what do we generate this year, that tie into the annuity of the servicing, asset that could be spun off independently and create, an exit, liquidity event. And that's a lot more common. But to do that in little microcosms inside of an institution, 3, 4, 5 pods that all have their own P&L, well, maybe we get there, but I don't see many financial institutions that are going to be real excited about that. So sorry about that, but yeah.
Well, I mean, it would have to be at like a top, I think it probably a top 15 lender, honestly, but it's such a rare thing. I can think of one example where it's sort of set up like this, but I don't want to get sued, so I won't name them. But it's like they have two shops under one license in a way. So there's someone building one thing over here and someone building one thing over here. And so I know
How do you think that's working at that unnamed shop, Ray? Is that working out pretty good over there?
That's a good point.
Yeah. Can it happen? Sure. But I think, to your point, there's one 750 agreement. There's one license. And if I'm going to have things branded separately and running separately with different credit authorities, well, I still got to answer to the SBA for my one 750 agreement, right? I can't say, well, that's my small balance group. Yeah, but that's your portfolio, sucker. And this is what you're doing to these taxpayer dollars. And so, like, it's just really from a compliance and regulatory standpoint, it's really tricky to think about how that works if you're doing it with multiple different groups inside the institution. I don't think you should leave before you revisit something Jared said earlier, though, because I was thinking, like, a BDO can become a victim of their own success in that they can't escape it. But someone who looks, Jared, at 70 loans a year is going to see something that inspires them at some point. And I've seen a number of BDOs exit that job into the private sector, acquiring a business or building a portfolio of properties, or they have an idea, right? And their PFS is really strong because they've been a good BDO for a long time, and it gives them the liquidity to be able to go and chase a different idea, right? And so I think, that can be an end game too. Not that our industry needs to see really good people leave. There aren't enough good ones to go around as it is, but I think you open additional doors up for yourself the more success you have in the BDO role, not just because you have more money to do things, but you're going to have more ideas. You're going to have more opportunities because of the number of businesses that you've touched. And so I would encourage BDOs not to forget that as an option as well.
I agree 100%, Dustin. I know a few people that have gone out and started their own consulting firms, if you will, like wholesalers. And it can be very lucrative and very rewarding.
All right, Jared, take us home. Any final thoughts?
No, I mean, I appreciate you having me on. I also appreciate you understanding what BDOs go through and, kind of validating some of that. And, I always enjoy talking to you. And I do think that what you're bringing, attention to the industry of, kind of these different models. At the end of the day, I think what you're saying without saying it is the industry probably does need to continue to evolve and change. And we probably do need to revisit some of these models. And as we all kind of know in banking, especially in the SBA industry, it's a very, very slow changing industry. And, sometimes it needs to be flipped over and tried to figure out a better way to do things. And so hopefully, as the industry evolves and as things, continue to move forward, something will start to change a little bit with these kind of roles.
Well, that's well said. And, because you said nice things about me, we'll plug your podcast. Everyone should go check out Before You Buy or Sell a Business podcast. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Did I miss a word? It's a long one, but check it out on YouTube because it has a heck of a production quality, if I do say so myself. But that's it for today, folks. I really appreciate the conversation. That was a fun one. Until next time, ta-ta.
All right, that's it for this week's episode. If you want more SBA content, you can sign up for our monthly newsletter and check out our sister shows, SBA Today and The BDO Show. We'll leave a link in the show notes. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode of The Art of SBA Lending. Ta-ta.